So, welcome to Leaders in Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Nick Harmon, and I hope this proves to be that mentor in your pocket for future leaders of real estate investment and development. Now, we're going to talk about the challenges, the obstacles, and maybe even a few of the benefits of leadership with the aid of our mentor's own experience. So, let's go. Today, I'm joined by Spencer Levy, global client strategist and senior economic advisor for CBRE, the world's largest commercial real estate services firm. A lawyer, investment banker, globetrotter, and voice of corporate real estate to the largest investors and occupiers. Spencer, welcome to the podcast.
Nick, thanks for having me. What a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine, Spencer. All mine. So why don't we get started? Tell us essentially, what's your responsibilities today?
Well, I think you've nailed one of them, which is I travel every single day all over the world. And what am I doing? I'm meeting with the largest both investor and occupier clients of the firm and of the industry. And it's an unusual position. I think most people in our industry cover one side or the other. I'm very fortunate to cover both. And it helps me with both because I get real perspective on what's going on. And this responsibility includes a variety of things. The things that you see on the surface include things such as the podcast, the Weekly Take, which we're very fortunate has been very successful. I do a tremendous amount of stage work. I probably give 200 live speeches a year to industry organizations, both internally and externally, one-on-one with clients, and then I meet with clients one-on-one that are not speeches. I then give advice. A global client strategist means I'm giving advice every day to our largest clients on what the trends are, what they should be thinking about. So if I want to, just cut right to the chase, it's a fun job.
I'm glad to hear it, and I'm sure certainly we'll dig into a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wind the clock back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What got you to this post, Spencer? What's in the backstory?
Well, the backstory is I've been in the business for 30 years, and as you pointed out, I was a lawyer, I was a banker. I've been at CBRE for almost 18 years in a variety of roles. But the joke is, and I've said this to some of my colleagues, I was like, well, you can call me what you'd like. And they used to call me the head of America's research. They used to call me the head of retail, capital markets, head of Latin American capital markets. The list is endless. Restructuring. I said, whatever job title you give me, my job is the same. Give the best advice possible to our clients, period. And that's what I've done. I've kind of just keep doing that using new forums. So I used to do a lot of white papers. I used to write a lot of blogs. I stopped doing that. And the reason why isn't because they're bad. And believe me, to my colleagues who write those white papers, amen, because I use them every day. So I'm not telling you not to stop. But my voice, I think, gets amplified in other ways. And the way my voice gets amplified is in the 4 ways I just laid out: the podcast, the stage work, the one-on-one meetings, and then I'm also a very active user of LinkedIn. And as you noted in the pre-call here, Nick, my travails on the road sometimes are pretty funny.
I definitely agree with that. So, I mean, anyone who doesn't follow Spencer already is missing out, frankly. So let's get into chapter 2. Let's talk leadership. Let's talk those early days of leadership, Spencer, in particular. When was your first opportunity to lead?
Well, I don't think that leadership is just a function of where you sit in the organizational chart. I think your first opportunity for leadership is the first time you had a conversation when you were early on in your career helping somebody who was maybe more junior in their career. And it could be while you were in high school. It could have been, look, I think that the formal definitions of leadership are important. They're real. Look at every corporate org chart. But I think leadership is not just that. There's 2 basic elements of leadership. One is the running of an organization, and the second is the softer parts of mentorship, leading by example, giving the advice to others so they can be better. The goal of leadership is to make people around you better, period, so that your organization can thrive, so that your organization can be more productive, so that everybody can be better. So there is the org chart part of it, and then there's the human is the wrong word, but the more leadership related to mentoring and making people better around you so that the organization is more productive. So I would say I've been doing that for a long time, way before I was even in business. But I would say that my current role, what I'm in right now, really started about, 12 years ago when I had the key moment. I guess this is now I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a moment, Nick, but here comes the key moment of everybody's career. And so I was very fortunate back in April to give my first quasi-commencement discussion at Auburn to their real estate group. My good friend Greg Winchester runs that group there. And in any event, in the speech, I said, the most important picture on your wall is your mirror. Tells you who you are, tells you what you got, tells you what you want to be, tells you what you like to do. And then you've got to have the courage to do that. And so I had a real moment back, I guess it must have been 12 years ago, at what was known as the America Summit in the Denver Convention Center in front of 3,500 people. And at that point, I believe I was running America's Research, and things were going fine, but I knew there was a better way. I just knew it. There was a better way to communicate. And so I had and I used the word courage because it was not the safest move I ever did. I said, this speech is going to change my life positively or negatively. And I got up there on stage, and you've seen 1,000 economic speeches, and I have no knock on these speeches. Most economists are way brighter than me, right? But what I felt they didn't do as well is they did not communicate effectively. And so I said, I'm going to do this my way. And my way was highly engaging, lots of pictures. I had a costume change during that presentation. I had
Spencer, is this the video where I've seen you get dressed up as a New York cabbie?
That is the video you saw me get dressed up like a New York cabbie.
Well, I mean, there's a lovely little Easter egg for anyone who wants to go and dig this out.
If you want to get a real deep Easter egg, go find the video of me running down the aisle. The Price is Right. That one is really priceless. But the point was, it took courage to do that speech in front of 3,500 people. And I'm telling you straight up, changed my life. It changed my life in terms of doing what I thought was more effective for our clients. And, well, I wouldn't be sitting on this show but without that speech.
Let's dig into this a little bit. You've talked about being a leader from a very early days, and frankly, sort of taking quite a novel approach to what leadership means. Even before it's been bestowed on you as a title. Have you always felt comfortable with it?
I would say that I'm very comfortable, maybe too comfortable, maybe sometimes uncomfortably comfortable, telling the truth, and meaning that it is the most powerful thing in the world. And you got to be very careful how you express it in certain contexts. But if you have a relationship of trust and you can give it to people straight, that person is your leader, whether or not they have a higher title than you or not. Every mentor I've ever had in my career, and I can name a few of them on this show, and if you're listening, nothing but love here, from Steve Swerdlow to Laura O'Brien to Chris Ludeman. I mean, the list is endless, right? They all told me the truth, and they all made me better. And I've tried to use those lessons for others. And that's really what I think great leadership is speaking to people, communicating with people in a way that makes them better. Here comes another truth bomb here, right? Because I'm the front guy on so many things, on the stage, on the podcast, I get a lot of accolades, right? Those aren't mine. Those are my team's, because I go up there and take their best ideas and I communicate them as well as I can. And so, but that's what leadership is. Leadership is effective team dynamics. Now, as a leader on that team, your job is to make that team better. And the team makes me better. I hope I make them better. Hope I don't annoy them too often when I'm on the road at 3:00 in the morning and my contact lenses get stuck to my eyeballs, which was one of my recent LinkedIn stories. But nevertheless, that's how I see it.
We'll revisit then some more of your lessons on leadership a little later. But let's get uncomfortable. Let's talk about mistakes. One of the reasons for doing this podcast is I want to be able to share with our audience when things have gone wrong. Career car crashes for our mentors, so that our guys can learn from a safe environment. So, thinking back, what's been some of the most uncomfortable mistakes in your earlier career, Spencer, and what can we all learn from those?
They're both strategic and tactical. Okay. And for people who aren't familiar with the two terms, strategic is big picture, long term. Tactical is in the moment. Okay.
Okay.
Let's start with the tactical in the moment, right? Because I think this is the one that people can work on today. I think everybody should work on it. I've gotten much more modulated in the way I speak. Like even on this very show, I'm speaking just very matter of fact, very calm, that sort of thing. When I used to live in New York and worked in New York, I spoke very brashly. I spoke arrogantly. I spoke in a way that I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of it at all. But that's how things went in New York. And in order to survive, the dog eat dog type of mentality was real. But then I took some of that with me when I left New York. I left New York 25 years ago, moved to Baltimore, and as Keith Moon would say, it went over like a Led Zeppelin. And for you non-music aficionados, Keith Moon was the drummer for The Who, and he famously named the band Led Zeppelin by telling that story to Jimmy Page at a bar. But nevertheless, knowing how to communicate is so important. And communicating, so this is tactical. I'll go strategic in a second. Just communicate better. And one of the things that I do is I teach public speaking. And you know what public speaking is? Every conversation you ever have. This podcast is public speaking, and the stage is public speaking. When you're in the elevator and the CEO walks in and asks you who you are, what you do, that's public speaking. And do it right. And do it effectively. Do it. Here's the key word. Do it persuasively. And now, I'm not saying not to emote. Now, I said I was too emotive when I was in New York. I was arrogant. I was, I use a lot of, salty talk, as they might say. But I learned in every forum, there's a way to communicate more effectively. It's basically ways to tell the truth more effectively. Because if you say, oh, Nick, that's a great sports jacket, but that T-shirt doesn't match with it. Okay, I could say that, right? But I could say it much more nicely. I could say it in a way that would be persuasive. Because the way I said it before would have put a wall between us. You see that? Even though I said the same thing, by saying it in an arrogant, too direct way, I've put a wall between us. You don't want walls between you and the next person. What you want are connections with you and the next person. And in order to create those connections, you need to communicate effectively. So I think the biggest error I made from early on in my career, and believe me, I still got to fight it sometimes. Always communicate as effectively as you can in that moment. And be aware of your emotions. Be aware of how things impact you. And if you're mad, never raise your voice, ever. I mean, these are like little tips from the road. Just don't do it. Because my dad taught me 40 years ago. Remember I said leadership starts young? 40 years ago, my dad said, the minute you raise your voice, even if you're right, you're wrong. It's black and white in my book. Okay. So that's tactical. Communicate better, and we can go into public speaking 101 as much as you'd like. Strategically, it comes back to what I said earlier about that mirror. You got to know who you are, right? And so I was a lawyer, didn't love it. I was a banker, I liked it. I was a leader, love it, in the way I love it. But I love my type of leadership. I don't like the type of leadership that is, very granular as it relates to the P&L, so to speak, right? Because there are people out there that love that stuff. And you know what? Great. Do that. You know what I really love to do? I love to be out there on the road with our biggest clients, advising them every day, everywhere. But I needed to find the opportunity, the path, the courage, and the opportunity. See, there's not always the opportunity. That's why these opportunities didn't hit me until my 40s to be able to do that. And so the strategic mistakes I made was when you look at the corporate ladder, you say, I want the next rung on the ladder, right? One of my great mentors, Laura O'Brien, said to me, life isn't a corporate ladder. Life is a jungle gym. Sometimes you get the corporate ladder. Sometimes you get the monkey bar. Sometimes you get the slide. 100% right. But in the few times in my career, I said, you know what, I'd rather get that next rung on the ladder because it looks cooler or it pays more or it's more prestigious. But it wasn't me. those were mistakes. And again, this isn't a follow your star speech. Early on in your career, you've got to do a lot of things you probably don't love. Some things you may not be the best at. What you need to do, and I've said this to 1,000 folks I've worked with, you just need to start off early on in your career and learn as much as possible, but as many things as possible, and eventually get to that point in your career where you're doing what you want to be doing. And it took me 20 years into my career to finally be doing what I love doing, right? I wish I gotten it sooner. I wish I had the courage to do it sooner. But also, it's not just courage. I wish I knew it sooner, because so often in our careers, our choices are not dictated by that mirror on the wall. The choices are dictated by the real or perceived expectations of others. And people need to move away from that. That's tough stuff, because sometimes those others are your parents, right? Sometimes those others are colleagues. Sometimes those others are people who don't necessarily, and these people may have your best interests at heart. They're not like they're bad people steering you wrong, but eventually finding out what you're good at and doubling down. Look, I'm the first to admit my flaws, and there are many. But when there's something that I believe that I'm really good at, or at least can be better than most at least can express that to others, I double down. And I tell everybody, do that. Find something where you're the best and be that.
I think that's good advice. I think that's really good advice. While we're on the topic of advice, though, Spencer, you run a hectic schedule. 150, 200 in-person presentations a year, I hear. That includes a huge amount of globe-trotting travel as well. Now, whilst I can't imagine our audience is quite so hectic, I do want to give them some advice about making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So what's your advice here? How do you stay so organised? How do you stay on top of a schedule and a diary like that?
Fortunately, I have a team that helps me with that, because there are things I'm very good at and there are things I just need help, particularly in the last 3 weeks. I think we mentioned, I think I've been to 12, 15 cities. I had 3 midnight flights last week, 3 in 1 week. Actually, I had 4. Forgive me. I missed 1, 4. And after the third one, my contact lenses in my eyes had a revolution. And I literally had to do a speech in Kansas City on Friday wearing sunglasses because I couldn't see. Because there are physical ramifications to the madness of the schedules. But every day of my career has pretty much been the same in terms of structure. I get up early every day, not super early, right? But I read the first couple hours of a day, 7 o'clock in the morning, read. I read the paper, I read the business stuff, I read research. And then I have my most important thing of the day. Every day, it's really important, I think, you get one great thing done a day. 1, not 10, 1.
Yeah.
And then I plan around that. So when I go to a city, I'm going to Tampa on Monday, and I'm meeting with a good friend of mine, Randy Anderson, who runs the University of South Florida's research real estate program. What did I do? I scheduled 5 meetings around that. I'm going to Dallas next week. I've got my anchor meeting, and I got 5 meetings around that. And that's kind of what I do. It's been my strategy to get these anchor, I call them anchor meetings, and then plan around them, doing the same thing for other clients. And it really helps. It sounds simplistic, but it is what works for me. Try to get one big thing done a day and then plan around it.
So imagine we're now in a one-to-one mentoring session, Spencer. I think our average audience is probably 28 to 35.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting their first taste of leadership right now. Do you think leadership has changed for that generation? Is it different than maybe you and I might have first tasted?
Mercy, mercy me. Things ain't what they used to be. Every generation blames the one before. That's Marvin Gaye. Yeah. Okay. There's been hundreds of books, and we've had book authors on Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers. By the way, that's me. That's the forgotten generation, and we are the awesome generation for folks. Do I think leadership has changed? I think that what people have suggested that have changed is that people have merged their values and their work ethic into one thing. So are people different in certain circumstances? I just had an author on my show last week which talked all about that. And there's been lots of books written about that. But ultimately, no. Okay, I'm gonna come down hard on this one. No, leadership hasn't changed. People may have changed in that they get married later, maybe they have kids later, maybe their values have changed later. But ultimately, being a good leader is taking the ingredients, which are the great people we have, and making them better. The fundamentals of leadership have not changed. People may have changed a little bit. Teams may have changed a little bit. Fundamentals of leadership, great leadership will always be great leadership. Now, styles of leadership can change. I used to use this example all the time of, sometimes when you had like the old school football coach, that didn't always have, a nice way of putting things. And then you have the new school softer touch. So some of those things have changed a little bit as well. But nevertheless, the fundamentals of good leadership, I think, are universal.
Something I want to ask that I think is pretty unique about Spencer. So let me frame it. Let me put it in the context. Corporate real estate as an industry it's often accused of lacking personality. I don't think it does a good enough job at selling itself as an industry. Now, frame that compared to Spencer. You have honed the idea of personal brand. We've talked at the very early stage, haven't we, about how your LinkedIn content and how successful that has been. But I wanted to ask you really as to how has that impacted your career? How important has that been to someone who's maybe eyeing up, thinking about, again, going back to our audience, these 28 to 35-year-olds, is this something they need to make time for? Or is that something they don't need to worry about?
When I talk about my voice, okay, you use LinkedIn, I use a broader term, my voice.
Okay.
And when I say my voice, I mean my voice. And I guard it jealously. And when I say I guard it jealously, it's like when people try to push back on my voice, I'm like, look, that doesn't sound like me, and the audience isn't going to use it. I think it's essential that everybody develop whatever their personal voice is. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I have my own voice. I have a unique voice that people know what it is when it's coming. They know I use a lot of pop culture references like I have on this show. I have a lot of funny stories like I do on LinkedIn. They aren't there just because I enjoy doing them. Do I enjoy doing them? Yes, I do. But I do them because they're purposeful. The purpose of them is to persuade. And persuasion is not an intellectual process. We like to say that it is, but it's not. It's an emotional one. You need to drop from people's heads to their hearts. And how do you get from people's heads to their hearts? By telling stories. And the essence of stories are funny stories, are personal stories told in your own voice. So going back to your specific question about corporate real estate being dry and stodgy or whatever comments you use there. I forgot the exact term you used, but I think I summed it up correctly. I love going in front of corporate occupier audiences because I tell them that. I say, how many of you have to give a report to folks that, are going to try to save 1 cent here, 2 cents there, 3 cents there? I'm like, great. I say, here's another way to look at the world. You're going to have to do that, whatever that corporate person told you to do. But your job is to persuade the powers that be, whoever they may be, that corporate real estate is a revenue generation tool. It is not a cost center. That is the fundamental shift. It is a tool of productivity. It is not a tool of efficiency. And that is the split. And, when you say those words to some folks are like, oh, no, you can't say that. I'm like, well, I just didn't I? Because I say that in front of every corporate audience. And believe me, the audience loves it because they're craving that. They're craving, because you know what that is? That they're craving the creativity that gives them the ability to do that. And so my current stage presentation is entitled All You Need Is Love. Yes, it's a Beatles themed presentation. And what I mean by that is most real estate is a want, not a need. You really only need 2 forms of real estate. You really only need housing, place to live, And industrial, a place to store your stuff. Everything else is a want. You got to want to come to the office. You got to want to go to retail. You got to want to be on this podcast. There's everything's a want. And if that's true, okay, make people love going there and you're going to do better than the next person. And so back to the LinkedIn thing. I recognize the biases that some may have against corporate real estate. I ain't that guy. I'm the guy who's pushing against that. I'm the guy saying, no, be more creative, be more productive, grow revenues. And the way you do that is making people love to be there. Now, that's a simplification of the argument, but LinkedIn helps. And everybody on this call, if you don't have your own LinkedIn page, by the way, that's the only social media platform I use. I don't use any of the others. I like it because it's professional. I need a certain level of professionalism to do this, but you should develop your own voice. If anybody comes to you saying, oh, yeah, we'll post for you, please don't do that. I know a lot of people do. I still love you. Nothing but love here. I'm not telling you, if that's you, you be you. But I just think you'll be more effective if you use your own voice.
Let's talk drivers. You gave me an insight to your morning routine then, Spencer, but what drives you? What gets you up out of bed?
This is the one answer that I give a lot, and I'm not proud of this answer, but I've said it in public and I'll say it again on this show. It's fear of failure. And when I feel that I'm not going to succeed, I get nervous and I fear it. And doggone it, I wish that wasn't the case. I just wish that wasn't true. What I wish was true was that I had all positive motivation. It was all wanting to do the right thing rather than needing to do the right thing. You with me? It goes back to that want and need thing. I need to do it. And I'm not saying I'm proud of it or not. I'm actually not proud of it. And I try everything possible not to use negative reinforcement for anyone, because I never want people to fear failure. But there's a lot of people that for whom it works, and I'm just being black and white, 100-0. Do not use that as a motivator because it can be debilitating. And what happens is that part of your crazy drive is built on your wanting to succeed, or rather, better say, needing to succeed. And so that's a motivator. And I can go into, I don't want to get all Freudian and psychological and where it came from, my parents or otherwise, but it's here. And there are healthier ways.
How do you quieten it? How without going too deep, sort of, Spencer? How do you quieten it? For anyone who's listening to this and they recognize that in themselves, that fear of failure. How do you avoid it being debilitating? How do you avoid it being paralysis?
Well, I try to simplify it. I think went right back to it. I have my one anchor thing, and then I plan around it. It's kind of methodical, right? So if you march down that methodical path, you will be able to control it better. But ultimately, I try to keep negative thoughts out, and I drink a lot of coffee.
Let's talk about drivers for our audience.
Mm-hmm.
What are good drivers? What are bad drivers?
If you're not thinking long term, I really don't want to hang out with you, because in the tactical moment to win the deal is not relevant. What's relevant is the long-term success of that client. That's it. The long-term success of you. And if you get too tactical in the moment, listen, I win deals, I lose deals. I still do. I lost a deal yesterday. And you know what? What's interesting about it was, this was a client I've had for 25 years. I was like, okay, we move forward. I get it. I didn't get mad or anything like that. I didn't try to change their mind. And I saw a lot of that early in my career. You still see a lot of that. And then you see some people do things that are just wrong, in terms of saying, well, if you don't give me this, I'm not going to give you that. I mean, no, this is not a transaction. Even though I've been a leader of transactional businesses, I don't view our business as transactional. I view it as long-term. Can I make your organization as successful as possible? Period. And by doing that, I believe that I'm going to get a disproportionate amount of the market share from that organization because I truly care about that organization. I don't care about the next deal per se. I don't not care, but I don't care to the level I care about the long term. So strategic versus tactical. If you're going to be short term and you're going to do things that I consider to be inappropriate in order to win or lose that short term tactical thing, that's not something I would endorse. By the way, that's hard. When you're early on in your career, particularly if you're in certain forms of brokerage and you're getting feast and famine kind of pay. Yeah, I get the pressure. I was a broker. Well, banker, it's a fancy name for a broker, but I was a banker. I got that pressure. I get it. God, you got to fight it. Long term. Sounds like it's easy for me to say, 30 years into my career, but please think that way.
I like that. And I think it's so true. I think it's so true. But I agree. It's so easy to succumb to the short term.
Yeah.
Now, let's keep on this trajectory. Let's keep on this sort of one-to-one mentoring session. What do you look for? What can our audience emulate from Spencer's sort of playbook? What do you look for in leaders in your business? Who's getting the promotions? Who's getting the taps on the shoulders because they're performing well?
That's not how I look at it. I look at it a little bit more tactically. And I look at preparation. That's the word I was looking for. So when I meet with great leaders, either on my show or one-on-one or in some other forum, they're prepared. They take everything seriously. They're focused. So I guess the word I look for is focus. And if I have no superpowers, and certainly I am not a super dresser, though we are both wearing sports jackets and Don Johnson t-shirts today.
And I think we look lovely.
I think we are both sharp dressed guys today for sure. Let's go with that. But I think the one thing I look for the most is focus on what is the task at hand, both tactically and strategically. And so I have interviewed a lot of folks, and when I teach public speaking, I tell them the key is to become maximum me, whatever you is. I'm not telling Nick how do you do it. I tell you how I do it, but I try people to become the best you can be and love that person. Right? Again, I'm trying to get away from that negative reinforcement thing and be proud of that person. That's what I look for. Preparation. And it goes up and down chain. I look for people above me. I look for people below me. And when I say up, above, and below, I hate to use those terms because I just don't like the hierarchical way of looking at things. But nevertheless, when I see people who I interview for jobs, I don't judge them on whether or not I want to have a beer with them. I judge them on how prepared they are for the interview. And when I judge that preparation, it's not rocket science most of the time. It's where did I go to school? How many kids do I have? What are my hobbies? Everything I have, my whole life's on LinkedIn. I'm the most transparent human being on the planet, right? If you don't know that stuff, why are you talking to me? But if somebody's really prepared, then they'll prepare for the next task at hand, which is to help our clients succeed. So preparation is the word I'd use both up and down the chain. And focus. Preparation and focus, those two words.
Okay, well, let's help these guys along a little bit. What book, what resource, whatever it might well be, what do you recommend for our aspiring leaders? What can they dive into that's going to help win this prep?
Well, now you're talking to the most biased guy on the world. I'm like, well, which book author did I interview recently? Help this student out. Well, I think there's a lot of things that can help you. First thing I strongly recommend is read everything. Don't just read business books. Get a hobby, please. And because I believe that learning is not something that's all linear. So if I were to give you like business books, I'd give you the obvious business books. I'd give you books by Adam Grant. I'd give you books by Angela Duckworth. I'd give you books by Esther Choi. And Esther was on my show, and she wrote a book called Storytelling about how to tell stories. That's the business book side of it. But other than that, get a hobby. And what do I mean by that? Why is he talking about that? Now I'm going to go off the rails on this show, but since this is a show, we can edit it out. Might as well go now, right?
I'm looking forward to this, Spencer. Come on, give it to me.
So during COVID, I got into horse racing. And why did I get into horse racing? I got into horse racing because there was nothing else on television. There was all the professional sports were off. I was stuck in my house, but they kept horse racing. I was like, why are they still doing this? And the reason why they had to continue horse racing is because unlike an automobile, a horse is either 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, or 4 years old. And if you don't keep running that horse, you will destroy that horse's career, right? So these horses had to keep running, right? They actually had a necessity to keep running. So that's why they kept running. But I start watching this. I'm like, what is the attraction to this? And I found, funny story. I went horse racing this past weekend in London in the Newmarket, and they run in the opposite direction. So I kept looking the wrong way for the horses to come in. I'm like, no, they're coming from that way. I'm like, what's up with that? But what I liked about it and what I learned about it, and this is why it fit me. It fit me because once I said, well, I just don't understand this. And then I, Mr. Academic guy, looked up horse racing and psychology, and there were thousands of PhD level articles written on horse race betting and psychology, and I read a lot of them. And you know what I discovered while reading these articles about horse racing and betting and psychology? How similar it was to real estate. And now I'll just give you one of 1,000 examples, but one example that's a simple one that people get. People always overbet the favorite mathematically, and they always mathematically underbet the underdog. And I'm just giving you, does that sound like something similar in the real estate business to you? I can give you 100 examples of that. But the point is that by doing that, it made me think bigger, made me think differently. Why did I make my presentation on the Beatles? Because I was thinking about how this music, which is not just such beautiful music, but it's evocative, makes me feel something. How is it making me change the way I think about real estate? Because again, I'm trying to persuade people to, all you need is love. No, but it's a big piece of this. If you can feel what you do, not just think what you do. And that's why having these other hobbies help.
Well, Spencer, we've got to start to wrap this up. You've got another busy schedule to get back involved in. So I'm very grateful you're making the time for this. But let's try and squeeze in one more question. And you're pretty uniquely, I think, qualified for this. On the Weekly Take, you interview some megastars of real estate, don't you? Some very successful, objectively successful people. You're a successful person yourself. How have you measured success? What's the metric then that you might use, that our audience might use?
Boy, I hate to be squishy on this one. And I think that what the audience is looking for are objective metrics of success. And objective metrics of success is how many listeners do I have?
Title, dollars.
Have we won money, or have we gotten more awards? And those things matter because they do. Because eventually, somebody who is 4 steps removed from your show is going to say, "Is this a good show or is this a bad show?" Right? But I'm going right back to the most important word of all: happiness. Are you happy? And that happiness, it doesn't, if it's money, amen. But I studied organizational behavior when I was in college. I went to Cornell. I have an industrial and labor relations degree. And the first thing I learned was that money is not a motivator for most people. You know what it is? It's a sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging can come from title. It can come from other group activities. But I go right back to happiness. And I will tell you that the last 10 plus years of my career, where I've been this globetrotting, public speaking, podcasting, LinkedIn person, is the happiest I've ever been professionally. And it makes me, I love speaking to my clients. I love giving better advice. I love learning about giving them better advice. That's what I like to do. Now, is that the only skill set you need to be a great corporate leader? No, but that's mine. And I'm doubling down on it.
Well, Spencer, I think that is a great way to wrap up our show. Let's encourage our audience to find more happiness, and no doubt that is the key to a very successful career. So, Spencer, thank you very much for joining me. To anyone in the audience who's been listening to this, make sure you click like, subscribe, and in the comment section, I want to hear from you. I want to hear about the questions that I've missed. I want to hear about the questions you want to hear from Spencer, and maybe also throw in a couple of suggestions about who you want to hear on the podcast coming up. So thank you again, Spencer, for making time for this.
Thank you, Nick. And I really appreciate the opportunity. And by the way, you do look like Don Johnson on Miami Vice right now. And I hope I'm trying to do the same.
Thank you very much.